heard that. Mr. Shapiro, proponents of curtailed speech often argue that certain types of speech amount to violence, noting that certain listeners are emotionally harmed when listening to ideas with which they disagree. There was an article in the LA Times that made this argument, going so far as to call on courts and legislatures to allow the restriction of hate speech as do all other economically advanced democracies in the world. Is there any limiting principle at play where forbidden speech is anything that a particular person or group of people find offensive?
No, I haven't seen any limiting principle at play at all on college campuses, which is the problem. You'll have people like Jason Riley from the Wall Street Journal treated exactly the same way as Ann Coulter or Milo Yiannopoulos, and they're poles apart in terms of how they express themselves and many of the views that they hold. So this idea that there is some sort of bright line, this is why I hate even the term hate speech is really difficult, because it just suggests that if I don't like what you're saying, or if I impute to you an intent that you may not have, then now you're hateful and you should be banned. It seems to me that it would a more effective use of terminology would say speech I find insulting or speech I find offensive. But the idea of hate speech itself, there are certain types of speech I think we can all agree are objectively hateful, but I don't think that there is any limiting principle at play from a lot of administrators, because I think that they use that club of hate speech in order to cudgel people with whom they disagree. They just say, okay, I don't like what you're saying now, and that's hate speech. And microaggression culture contributes to this. I mean, literally on campuses, students will be told that if you say to another student, where are you from, that this is some sort of microaggression, that this is a minor form of hate speech. If you say, where are you from, because you're implying they're not from here. Well, I mean, of course you're not from here. I mean, I assume you weren't born on this spot, but it doesn't matter. You know, the idea that you're going to broaden out terminology in order to prohibit groups that you don't like or ideas that you don't like, I would much prefer that if we're going to move the ratchet in any one direction, let's move the ratchet in favor of more speech. And I agree, of course, with Mr. Lawrence that it's perfectly appropriate if an administrator wants to say that I personally disagree, the university doesn't agree with the views that are being espoused by a particular speaker. That's perfectly appropriate. But sometimes there are gray areas in terms of what the university is doing. When Mr. Lawrence was at Brandeis University, Ayaan Hirsi Ali was uninvited from the university because of blowback from some of the students. I mean, is that a case of her free speech rights being violated? It's a private university, but if it were a public university, would that be a case of her free speech rights being violated because administrators decided not to stand up for those because students were upset? I mean, this is why I think that the notion that there is some sort of grand intelligentsia running the universities who are capable of discriminating between hate speech and normal speech and should be sitting atop a hill somewhere under a palm tree like a Qadi dispensing justice on a case-by-case basis, I think it's nonsense, and I don't think that they have any rational standards they apply.
I'll just conclude with this, Mr. Chairman, that I think this hearing is very important. I think it's the main thing that students ought to get, and all of us ought to get, is to deny ourselves access to other people's views, is to deny ourselves furthering our own education. This is how you learn. And I would like to compliment Mr. Carolla on his metaphors, football, and hardware. Thank you very much.
I thank the gentleman. When Mr. Shapiro was given his example about asking the question and it being perceived as a microaggression, asking the question, where are you from, I noticed the students in the audience all nodding their heads. And so in our subsequent hearings, we're gonna look to get some students here who can give us some firsthand knowledge of what it's like from their perspective